Fáilte roimh gach duine fáilte roimh an seo go dtí an webinar inniu. David Rouse is my name, Multi-Unit Developments Advisor with the Housing Agency. You're all very welcome to our online live session today, Multi-Unit Developments, Waste Management and Recycling. We have over 500 people registered for this session today, so while people are joining, I will go through some housekeeping for the session. This is our timetable for today, so shortly I will run a survey on the audience composition just to get a sense of who is with us today, so I'd be grateful if you could answer that in a second. We'll do a little update on news in the wider mud sector. Then we will have, at about 10 past the hour, our presentation from our expert speakers. I'm very excited to have a fantastic panel of specialists in the waste management recycling sector and from the local authority sector with us today, and we'll find their insights very, very valuable. We will have a Q&A session, so we have questions received in advance by email, so thank you for those. We will have a little bit of a panel discussion and we'll wrap it up just before the hour, and we'll have a couple of polls as well that we might run a little earlier in the session, but we'll do those as we go along. Reminder that we have my colleague Vivian Pringle in the background on the chat. If you have any questions with the audio or the visuals, as I say, we have questions received by email. We may have time for some live, so if you have some thoughts on questions on following our presenters' slides, you might think about those and pop them into the Q&A later on. We will email the slides, all of them around, mine and our presenters, and this session is being recorded for future use, so we will use it on our YouTube channel. A reminder about the Housing Agency for those that are new to our sessions, our webinar. We are under the auspices, the aegis of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. Those are our offices in 53 Mount Street. We work with the department, local authorities, approved housing bodies and wider stakeholders to build the to promote the building of sustainable communities. I'm going to stop sharing now and I'm going to run our first poll, and that is on the audience composition. So we'd be very grateful if you could let us know who you are. This is an anonymous survey, an anonymous question. So please let us know what sector you are from and with us here today. Are you an OMC director? Are you a property management agent? Are you a waste management industry professional or service provider? Do you work with a local authority or an approved housing body? Maybe you're a homeowner occupier or a landlord. Maybe you're from the legal sector, maybe you're in the construction sector, or you're from some other sector. So we'd be grateful, as I say, if you could give us an answer on that. I'll run that for another 20 seconds or so. We have almost 230 people joined as of now, and we'd be grateful if you could give us a sense of the audience composition. So I think nearly 200 of you have responded to that. We're very, very grateful. Just gives us a sense of who's with us today and allows us to plan for future webinars as well. So I'll end that now. I've just run it for a minute and I'll share the results with everyone. So about 15% of you are OMC directors, about 20% are licensed property management agents, about 24% from the AHB and local authority sector. We have about 12% from the construction sector. So, and of course, we have a number of colleagues from the waste management industry as well. So very grateful to you for joining us today. I'm going to come back and share my slides again, and we will just go through some, as I promised, some news in the sector. So a little bit of information on the housing data that's come out that might be of interest to you, and point you to some miscellaneous resources and supports for those of you in the MUDS sector. So CSO data, just it's interesting to look back over the last 10 years and see the number of apartments for which planning permission has been received. You can see the grey line there up at around 25,000 in 2021. As we know, multi-unit developments are not restricted only to apartment typologies. We know there are houses in multi-unit developments as well, and we try and reach out to those in the sector. So interesting to see the planning permissions. We can look at the completions over the last 7 or 8 years since 2016, and you can see the yellow or orange line is the number of apartment completions. And again, the upward trend in the sector will be known to you, I suppose, intuitively and anecdotally, but it's useful to see the information there from our colleagues in the CSO. We've included a link to it. On the outputs in 2023, it's useful or interesting to see what the outputs in terms of completions were for 2023 in apartments. So nearly 12,000 completed, which was up 28% on the previous year. 72% of all completions in Dublin were apartments. 36% of all completions of housing nationally were apartments, and 78% of all apartment completions were in the Greater Dublin area, so the 4 Dublin local authorities. So interesting just to see, I suppose, what the pipeline is and what the delivery is on apartments recently. And I know there was a report out earlier in the week from the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland with some insights around apartment delivery as well, so that might be worth checking out if of interest to you. As always, we ask you to please help the system to identify owners management companies around the country. You can do that if you're a management agent or a solicitor or a company secretarial expert and you're incorporating owners management companies, or you're filing the annual returns for OMCs by way of the A1 or the B1. So please tick the box that's highlighted in red when you're going through the Companies Office online registration environment, or CORE, and identify OMCs. We wrote some guidance on that for management agents, and maybe others can pick it up as well, in a recent edition of Surveyor's Journal. And you can see the detail there on the request to tick the box and include the right format of OMC names. It helps us to get a census of OMCs in the country. A reminder of other resources that are out there for you in the sector. We now have 19 webinars on our YouTube channel, most recently that of the 28th of February, where Maeve Hogan, the Chief Executive Officer of the Property Services Regulatory Authority, was kind enough to give us her time. Maeve spoke about the regulation of licensed property management agents, the Category D type, who are service providers to owners management companies in MUDs. A recording of that is on our YouTube channel. We sent around the slides with that recording to those who attended. Please drop us an email, mud@housingagency.ie, if you want to get the slides from that if you missed it. A reminder that over and above those webinars, we have 6 specialist training sessions on the topics listed out there for you on screen. The next webinar that we have is on the company law space. So we're delighted to have a speaker from the Corporate Enforcement Authority who will be speaking about the CEA's, the authority's role in company law compliance for OMCs. There will be a discussion of directors' duties and addressing non-compliance in the sector through the authority's complaints and investigations process. More information will be available on our website, housingagency.ie, and registration not quite open yet because it is a ways off, but keep an eye on our website for the details of that. A reminder of our publications. We have 4 in particular that it might be helpful to remind you about. Our most recent one on the left, the Guide to Insurance. Our publication on writing, on articles like the one in Surveyor's Journal and other publications that might give you a wider sense of what's going on in the sector, both from a construction, property management, OMC, company law, etc. perspective. Our guide for OMC directors, our concise guide, which is not quite so concise, it runs to 40 pages, covering broadly company law topics, published in conjunction with Chartered Accountants Ireland. And finally, on the right-hand side, engaging a property management agent. Hints, tips, questions, guidance, information for OMCs looking to tender out for a new property management agent. And a lot of the principles in that document have application to other tendering processes for other services in your estate. So hopefully lots of useful guidance, hints, tips, information for you. Some updates, and you can maybe look at this in your own time offline, on the Housing for All objectives around regulation of property management, of owners management companies, and regulation under the MUD Act. We've included some updates in terms of the parliamentary questions around that, maybe to look at in your own time. So to today's session, we have expert speakers from the Waste Enforcement Regional Lead Authorities, or CUWERLA. We've put a link to their website, and CUWERLA is engaged with the protection and improvement of the natural environment through good waste management practices and activities around the country, the enforcement of waste legislation, and complying with EU and national requirements in that respect. And I'll introduce our specialist speaker from CUWERLA in a second. We also have fantastic speakers from the Irish Waste Management Association, the IWMA, and the IWMA is a trade association for waste management companies in Ireland. Their members sign up to industry standards and rules of the association to ensure they provide waste management services to the public and to business in a professional and ethical manner. So delighted to have with us from CUWERLA, from one of the local authorities in the Northwest, David Barry. David is the Waste Enforcement Regional Lead Authority Coordinator for Connacht, Ulster. He's worked in environmental regulation and enforcement for over 20 years in local government, and we've explained what CUWERLA do and provided a link to their website. From the Irish Waste Management Association, we're delighted to have John Dunn, and John has 45 years experience in the waste industry with Manvic, with Thornton's Recycling, and more recently with Panda. John has served as a director of the Irish Waste Management Association, and he's currently engaged on policy with them and a task force to help Ireland achieve its EU 2025 recycling targets on municipal waste. Also from IWMA, we have Conor McIlvaney, who's going to give us some insights into, I suppose, leading edge technology and leading edge developments in waste management, recycling, segregation in apartments and multi-unit developments. And Conor has 20 years experience in the industry all around the country, a keen interest in technology and its development in reaching our recycling targets. And Conor holds a master's in mechanical engineering from Queen's and a master's in sustainable waste management from Southampton. Last but not least, another Conor, we have Conor Walsh with us, and Conor is currently the secretary of the Irish Waste Management Association. Conor has a long history in this sector as well, a geologist by profession with a Bachelor of Science from UCD. So delighted to introduce all of our speakers with us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to ask David Barry to kindly turn on his camera and turn on his mic, and we'll hand over to David. There are going to be some challenging thoughts put forward, some challenging positions, some perhaps uncomfortable truths for some people in the sector, but we're delighted to have David with us, and I'll hand over to David. And David, you might share your slides, and Vivian, our colleague in the background, is going to help with that. So thank you very much, David, and over to you.
Thanks, David. And I'm going to start now. My name is David Barry. I'm the CUWERLA coordinator for the Connacht Ulster region, and I'm going to give you a short talk for the next 10 minutes on multi-unit developments and waste management. Thanks, Vivian. Next slide, please. Just a little bit in terms of what I'm going to speak to you today. I'm going to give you an update in terms of the background to the CUWERLAs, waste classification, our national targets, legislation, obligations on multi-unit developments, the enforcement piece, benefits of segregation, and where you can get some additional guidance and advice. Next slide, please. Yeah, background to the CUWERLAs. Who are we? We're the Waste Enforcement Regional Lead Authorities, and we were established in 2015. We're a local authority shared service, and our main aim is to provide a coordinated and consistent approach to waste enforcement across local authorities. So if you look to the map on the right-hand side, it shows the 3 waste regions. It covers approximately 31 local authorities, and the main goal here is that waste enforcement is applied evenly across the state, from Donegal to Kerry over as far as Dublin City. So we're also there to enhance and support waste enforcement functions across local authorities. And that's a very important role that we have in providing advice, guidance and support to local authorities in the area of waste enforcement. Next slide, please. In terms of the CUWERLA itself, we underwent an enhancement at the back end of 2023. And the CUWERLAs are going to continue to support waste enforcement functions in local authorities to provide assistance and guidance and support. But we're also now going to take a front of house approach when it comes to the monitoring and enforcement of household waste curbside collectors. So that's the collectors that collect your waste. We will be involved in the frontline monitoring and enforcement of waste collection permit conditions associated with those collectors. And also we're going to take on special projects. And what I mean by that is that we, the CUWERLA, will assist local authorities where they run into difficulty with operators or with cases of a large-scale illegal dumping, and we'll assist and help or even take on the case ourselves. Next slide. Just to get around to the waste classifications and definitions, household waste definition. What is household waste? Well, it's waste produced within the cottage of a building or self-contained part of a building used for the purpose of living accommodation. So that speaks to your multi-unit developments or apartments. And anybody in those buildings or self-contained parts of a building are generating waste. And you have to get, an understanding of this concept of original waste producer. So that's anybody that's living or functioning inside in these building or self-contained part of a building would be considered the original waste producer, and it's a very important concept when it comes to waste management. In terms of the multi-unit developments and apartments, it's very important to understand that it's classified as household waste and not commercial waste. So when you have an authorized waste collector coming to collect your waste from the multi-unit development, it's collected as household waste, and there is a requirement on that collector to collect it and report it as household waste. So those definitions are very important when it comes to the whole area of waste and multi-unit developments. Next slide, please. In terms of the big picture, in terms of national targets, Ireland generates approximately 3.17 million tonnes of municipal waste, and that is a stat based in 2021 data from the EPA. And municipal waste consists of household and commercial waste. Now you're going to ask you, what is municipal waste? Well, it's a mixture of residual waste or general waste, recyclable waste, bio-waste, and bio-waste speaks to food waste and organic and garden waste. Bulky waste is your mattresses and your furniture, and your waste is electrical waste. And household waste accounted for up to 57% of this 3.17 million tonnes of municipal waste. And we're currently recycling 41% of that waste. So we have targets to meet by 2025 and 2030, 55% by 2025 and 60% by 2030. And there's a significant challenge to meet these upcoming targets in the next 24 months. Next slide, please. In terms of there's national waste enforcement priorities that are set by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and they're set every year, and they're on a 3-year rolling cycle. Now, there's 5 national priorities. So in terms of construction and demolition waste, ELV and metals, and household and commercial waste. And in terms of the household waste, the objective in terms of these national waste enforcement priorities to maximize the segregation and recycling of municipal waste, reduce contamination in the residual mixed dry recycling streams to get a better quality material, and ultimately local government is tasked with the enforcement and the rollout and the delivery on these national waste enforcement priorities. Now, this next slide is very interesting, and there was a study done by the EPA last year, and it did a household municipal waste characterization study. That's very simply, they went and they looked at the waste arising from households, and what they found was there was a very high level of contamination. So if you look to the slide here on the right-hand side, 64% of the waste in the general waste bin should have been in the recycling organic waste bin. That's 2/3 of the material shouldn't have been in their general waste bin. In terms of the recycling bin, 36% of the waste should have been in the general waste bin or organic waste bin. So there's a huge amount of contamination in the general waste bin and the recycling bin. And, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of getting the right waste in the right bin. Next slide, please. In terms of the legislation, I'm not going to go into detail in the legislation, but just to give you a very quick overview, the Waste Management Act of 1996 is the main primary legislation that covers waste management in Ireland. 2 sections of interest here, Section 32 and Section 34. Section 32 speaks to the whole of the waste, Section 34 speaks to waste collection permits. And we also have the Waste Management Collection Permit Regulations of 2007. That deals with how waste collectors should operate and collect the waste arising both household and commercial waste. Then we have the European Union Household Food Waste and Bio-Waste Regulations of 2015. These are quite important, and there was a change, a revised regulation there just at the end of last year where all households have to provide it with a 3-bin system. and across the state. Now, Regulation 515252B of this regulation speaks to the obligations of the collector, and Regulation 6171 speaks to the obligation of the householder. And very simply, what it says there in those 61 and 71, that the householder must source segregate their food waste, and they must not put their food waste into the general waste bin. And that is stated in law, and it's an offence to put food waste into the general waste bin. Reg 12 speaks to owner management companies and property management agents and their obligations there as well. And also we have local authority bylaws. These are local bylaws that are made by your local authority, which promotes the source segregation of waste and the presentation of waste in your functional area. Next slide, please. To boil it down, what's the obligations? Well, obligations on householders, obligations on those living in multi-unit developments. There is an obligation in law to source segregate your waste. You have to have a general waste bin, you have to have a recycling bin, and you have to have an organic waste bin. And food waste must be kept separate from non-biodegradable materials. That means that food waste must be put in your organic waste bin and should not be put in your general waste bin or your recycling bin. And again, reiterating the fact, food waste must not be deposited in the residual black bin or the general waste bin. Next slide, please. In terms of the obligations on collectors themselves, there's a whole raft of obligations. They have to provide separate collection of waste, keep waste separate after collection for recovery and recycling, bring waste to an authorised treatment facility, prepare and publish a customer charter for households, provide an incentivized charging system for customers, have separate collection of food waste, provision of an approved food waste receptacle bin that's designed for reuse, as well as waste collectors also must provide information to local authorities on householders not availing of a food waste collection service. And that's a very important point, that they have to give us the information on householders not availing of a food waste collection service. And also in terms of the collectors, they must provide a household food waste pack where such a food waste receptacle has not been provided previously. So that's part of the new regulations. If a food waste bin hadn't been provided previously, they are obliged to provide a food waste a receptacle, a food waste pack to advise and help householders on how to segregate their food waste. Next slide, please. In terms of owner management companies or property management agency, you are very important as the management of waste at your facilities. You have to engage the services of an authorised waste collector. You have to provide separate waste receptacles, a 3-bin system, general waste, recycling bin, and organic bin. And those bins must be properly sized for the number of apartments that you have in your multi-unit development. So that whereby there's enough bins, there's enough provision of bins to account for the food waste, general waste, and recycling waste arising from your development. You must have a waste storage area that's secure, and that is not accessible to outside members of the public. Only to tenants and occupiers and waste collectors have access to those that waste area. There's also an obligation on owner management companies and property management agents to provide information to your tenants and to your occupiers on how best to manage waste in the multi-unit developments, and provide guidance and assistance and help and information to the tenants and occupiers of these multi-unit developments. Next slide, please. In terms of enforcement, households, it's an offence not to source segregate your waste, and I've already spoke to that previously. In terms of collectors, they have an obligation to comply with the terms of the waste collection permit, and they must comply with the conditions of the waste collection permits, otherwise it's an offence. And in terms of management companies and other persons, you have an obligation to ensure that you're not facilitating the unauthorised treatment of waste. And what I mean by that, and that's stated specifically in Section 32 of the Waste Management Act, is that you have to provide a 3-bin system. You have to ensure there's a general waste bin, recycling bin, organic bin, and also that that area is secure and that there's no cross-contamination in those bins that would prevent the proper segregation of waste. So by default, you have an obligation there to ensure proper waste management practices at the multi-unit developments, and that you're not facilitating the unauthorised treatment of waste or allowing waste to go into the wrong bins. Next slide, please. In terms of enforcement and who's tasked with it, local authorities are tasked with enforcement. So that's the 31 local authorities across the state. The local authority is primarily going to deal with the householders, and CUWERLA, through our new enhanced role, we will be dealing primarily with collectors and enforcing the permit conditions of household curbside collectors. Now, in terms of offences and fines under the Waste Management Act 1996, if you get a summary conviction, it's a Class A fine. You can be fined up to €5,000 or imprisonment for 12 months or both. If it's a prosecution under the European Union Household Food Waste and Biowaste regs, you can, on summary conviction, get a Class B fine, which is up to €4,000, or imprisonment for 3 months or both. So that's just in terms of the summary conviction. There is higher fines for indictable offences, but I'm not going to go there today. Next slide, please. In terms of the benefits of segregation, there is potential cost savings on waste charges. If you can divert the waste that's arising from a 100-unit, multi-unit development and divert that waste into the recycling bin and organic bin, you can have potential savings on the general waste bin or the black bin on charges. So there's potential cost savings there on waste charges for the apartment block. It's also better for the environment. It supports the climate challenge that we're currently experiencing at the present time. And also it reduces the amount of residual waste generated. Like, there's less waste going to landfill, less waste going for incineration if we can divert it into the recycling bin or the organic waste bin. And also the increased quantity and quality of recycling material collected. That's very important, that we're producing a good quality recycling material that the collector can use and repurpose and put it into put it to reuse. And also in capturing a valuable resource, this food waste that we're diverting into the organic bin, this can be turned back into compost, and it feeds into this whole idea of circularity and reusing the waste and material that we have currently out there. So there's great value in capturing this very valuable resource. And ultimately meeting Ireland's national and European recycling targets. I spoke about it earlier in terms of the 55% target we have to reach by 2025 and the 60% target by 2030. So, there's great benefits in segregation, from cost savings down to, helping the environment, the climate change challenge, and also meeting Ireland's national and European recycling targets. And coming up to my final slide here, in terms of if you need advice and guidance and assistance, we have the local authorities. There's 31 local authorities across the state. There's environment departments, there's waste management departments in those local authorities. They should be able to provide you with help, guidance, and assistance in terms of any questions you may have or difficulties you have. There's also a fantastic website called the mywaste.ie website, and it really is a great resource there in terms of how to manage waste and do best with waste. We also have the EPA, the Department of the Environment, Climate Action and Communications. Their websites are very good and very informative. And also we have authorised waste collectors themselves. They are a fantastic resource whereby you can engage with your collector, find out and get advice from those collectors in terms of best practice and how they can work with you to achieve the best outcomes in terms of source segregation of waste at your multi-unit developments. And then finally, we have the NWCPO, that's based in Offaly, and they're involved in issuing permits out to waste collectors. So that's it really, David, in a very quick nutshell. And if anybody has any questions or queries, look at later on, David can give out my details and I'll speak directly to them if needs be. Thanks.
Fantastic, David. That's brilliant. Lots of food for thought, lots of challenges around what we all have to do, whether we're OMC directors, property management agents, etc. I now ask John Dunn to kindly turn on his camera and his video. Great stuff, John. And I've introduced John earlier. John is from the Irish Waste Management Association, and he's going to talk to us about some of the practicalities on the ground from the waste collectors' perspective. So we can see that's your slides are up. Great, looking good. And I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Sorry, I skipped over there. So John Dunn is my name. I'm a long time in the waste business, and I'm currently working on behalf of the IWMA, heading up a task force designed to help Ireland meet their recycling targets. The task force consists of 9 representatives from 7 different waste companies, all of whom are members of the IWMA. In fact, most waste companies, 90+%, are already members of the IWMA. The task force mission is to increase our MSW recycling rate from 41% to 55%. Mightn't sound like a lot, but when you look at the pattern over the years of how recycling has increased, that's a huge gap. 14% is a massive lift, and it's quite a challenge. So failure to meet those targets can result in up to €100,000 per day, which is an enormous amount of money per annum, and you still have to meet your targets. So those fines carry on until the targets are met. So it's obviously very important we try to meet those targets in time for the 2025 figures. So what we did as a task force, we started by identifying areas where Ireland can improve its recycling levels sufficiently to meet the targets on time. So I'll just run through a couple of quick examples of the type of thing we're doing. It's not by no means exhaustive. The first thing is to roll out brown bins to, as David said earlier, the obligation now is to roll out brown bins, not just to the 64% of houses who already should have a brown bin service, but also to the other 36% who are primarily rural, and up to now, or up to last year, they didn't have to be supplied with a brown bin. Now they do. It's everybody in the country should have a brown bin. Very important to realise that one of the main reasons why brown bins, even if people have them, don't use them that much, is because you know, unless you have a facility in your kitchen, generally people have a recycling bin and a waste bin, and when it comes to the chicken leg, well, it's not going in the recycling bin, so it goes in the waste bin. Highly unlikely anybody is going to go out to their with that bag full of waste from their kitchen to their waste bin and separate out the food waste at that point. So the message here is you need somewhere in your kitchen for food waste. It's not actually very, very large volume, so it can be done with the likes of that, a 7-litre caddy. One of our members did a nice little trial and back in 2023, February 23, and identified 3,000 of their customers who rarely, if ever, presented their brown bin for collection over the previous 12 months. They gave them all a 7-litre caddy, a nice starter pack of compostable liners, which you can see there, all available in all the shops, and an information pack, just an information leaflet showing what goes in and what does not go in the brown bin. So by August of 28, by August, 28% of those customers were regularly presenting the brown bin. So that's a real result at a very low capex, if you like, to the waste operator. Yes, he gave away 3 caddies for every one that got used, but it was a brown bin now being used, and all that food waste separated out from the waste bin. So it really is a positive result. Roll out brown bins to commercial customers. Again, that became law in July of last year, and the challenge for the industry is to first of all, get the commercial operators to accept that they need to take one and use it. And that's a big challenge, because up to now, none of these or very few of these enterprises, obviously hospitality and so on, have had brown bin service for a long time. But your general canteen in a 50 people factory, that creates a lot of brown bin waste, which up to now is going in the general waste bin. So that's what this new initiative is for now. Contamination, as David pointed out, in domestic recycling bins is over 30% nationwide. There's contamination detection technology out there, which essentially is cameras in the back of the truck, so that when the bin is tipped and emptied, a picture is taken of the waste before it's drawn into the waste compactor. And that bin that's been lifted and the picture that's been taken is tracked back to the customer who presented the bin, because, of course, as you probably know, every bin has a chip in it, an RFID chip, and that chip is logged and registered to the customer in question. So the pictures on the left or right can easily be identified to the customer who put that waste in their recycling bin. These people would then get a letter or an email with a picture of that has been seen. The pictures are all reviewed by the waste company's staff, and where they see contamination, they just drag the mouse over it. It highlights it with a red square. A drop down menu will come and it'll say, what is this? Is it a banana? Is it a nappy or whatever? And then you can see at the bottom there, in that case, box 1 is organic and should be in the brown bin. And box 2 is waste that should be in the black bin. It's woven plastic fabric unsuitable for recycling. So it's very much an educational tool, but the results have been astounding. One major company in the country have been using this for over I got some information from them on a 3-year period. And you can see there, this graph represents 9 routes which are serviced on a fortnightly basis. and the level of contamination by virtue of pictures is tracked. And you can see there that from sort of a 55% of customers initially have pictures with contamination, and over a matter of just a few short months, those picture levels drop down to single figures. Now, that's not a direct correlation with contamination levels. It's obviously to do with the pictures, but I can assure you from the further research that was done on actually waste characterization, it translates from a drop from 34% in real contamination in recycling bins down to single figures like 7 or 8%. That's a massive sea of change for people, and it sort of sticks for most people. You've got 70-80% of people, once they're informed that they're doing the wrong thing, they clean up their act and they stop doing it. And the ultimate sanction then with somebody who's not playing ball is we just take away their recycling bin and give them a waste bin, because that's what they're doing. They're just using both their bins as waste bins. And that seems to sort them out fairly quickly too, I can tell you. The EPA did a characterization study. Again, David made some reference to it, but what it reveals is that 40% of the waste being placed in the wrong bins. Of all the waste is going in the wrong bins, and 64% of what's in the residual bin should not be there. On the commercial collections, you have the same sort of situation. Over 70% of the material in the commercial waste bins just shouldn't be there. So there's a serious lack of education, responsibility, focus. And that's one of our missions, is to try and get across to the customer, our customers as a waste industry, that look, this is wrong, and we're going to fail to meet our targets if you don't sort of sort it out at the back door where it needs to be fixed. So what's the story of apartments and brown bins? So there's approximately 220,000 apartments in the country. Only 10% or so have brown bin collections, leaving 200,000 without. And many apartment blocks don't even have a recycling bin, which is, in this day and age, is an absolute disgrace. But there you go. So again, David touched slightly on this. There's historically, apartments in a waste company are dealt with under the commercial remit, because it's the commercial salesman who goes out and meets the OMC or the PMA and does a deal. And that's very far from the household, where it's just house by house by house. But the reality is, they are captured, they are covered under the what's 10 years old now, that the household has to have a brown bin for food. Admittedly, at the beginning, much bigger agglomerations of houses, but certainly every apartment block qualified. But it just slipped through the cracks, and apartments just never got the focus that they should have got. But hopefully now, with all we're doing, that's what today is about, and other things that the task force are doing, we're going to bring that, we're going to fix this, hopefully. So if any of you are responsible for apartment complexes and don't have a brown bin service, you really do need to contact your waste service provider, and they have to give it to you. And if they don't, you just ring your local authority enforcement officer, and that will be sorted out pretty quick, I can assure you. So in terms of cost, the reality is, if you don't have a brown bin and then you get a brown bin, it's a bit naive to expect it's going to be cheaper, because of course a different truck has to come along and collect that material. So there's a cost already. But on the flip side, when you divert material from the waste bin, the waste in a waste bin is the most expensive to process and dispose of, by comparison with brown bin material, which of course can be changed. There's an energy factor, and then it can be changed into compost. So the treatment costs are dramatically lower. So between the additional cost for extra collection and the savings on disposal, hopefully the additional cost is minor, if any. And one of the barriers to the provision of the pre-bin system has to do with many management companies not being aware that they're legally obliged to provide the pre-bin service to the residents. So just be aware that when your waste provider comes knocking on the door and saying, listen, you have to have a brown bin, they're only doing what their waste collection permit insists they do. And if they don't do it, they can be and will be prosecuted. So just spare a thought from where the waste companies are coming. They might sound like a pain, knocking and forcing and what have you, but it's got to be done. So I'm sorry about my screen here. I'm missing the beginning of that screen there. So I'm just saying, in essence, of course, you can, of course, just have two bin. Sorry, don't be caught out by somebody offering you a single or two bin service, which will be cheaper, because everybody's breaking the law in that situation, you know. And finally, I have to say, when you are getting brown bin service provided, it's absolutely vital that you say to your waste company that you want a brown bin caddy for the kitchen in every apartment, supplied to every apartment. These are not expensive. It's not a big deal. It's not an expensive cost. And every time a brown bin is supplied to an apartment block, whatever number of apartments in there should be given individually a kitchen caddy, instruction leaflet, and the compostable liners. So the sooner everyone gets their full tree bin service in their apartments, just like every house in the country has to at the moment, the sooner we can reach our national recycling targets. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to hand over now to Conor McElvaney, who will bring you through some security measures for bins and bin contamination. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Conor McElvaney is my name. I'm a waste management professional working with Country Clean in County Cork right now. I've spent a lot of time over the last 20 years dealing with contaminated bins, with my head inside a wheelie bin, looking at contaminated material, dealing with the issues that arise out of that. And as arising out of that, I'm working on an initiative to try and reduce the amount of contamination that are in our recycling bins. As mentioned by the previous speakers, contamination is a big problem where we've got the wrong material in the wrong bin, be it residual waste in a recycling bin or a brown bin, or it is organic waste in a residual bin. So I'll just give you a little insight into something that's being worked on right now that might be of interest. So the reduction of contamination in recycling at apartments is the subject we're interested in talking about. So what are the causes of contamination? That's really what we're trying to tackle. Major cause we have tragedy of the commons. As people understand, it only takes one person to contaminate the rest. And if it's not dealt with, the rest of the people using the bin will say, why bother, it gets contaminated anyway. So the people who actually would have an interest in recycling will get turned off if they see contamination not dealt with. Right now, when we're dealing with multi-unit developments or apartment blocks, there is an element of anonymity and a lack of traceability. So no one knows who used what bin. Therefore, if contamination is found, it's pretty much impossible to find where it came from. So if an apartment has a recycling bin and it's found to be contaminated on collection, there's very little that can be done about it right now. It can only be collected as waste and maybe at best give out a few leaflets to try and educate the apartment dwellers. There's a lack of feedback. When contamination is found, there is no feedback to the apartment dwellers to inform them of the event and what to do to fix it. A lack of education. In many cases, apartment dwellers are not sure what should go into each bin, and therefore, if in doubt, don't try. Lack of motivation. Apartment dwellers don't feel they need to make the effort to segregate. And finally, a lack of importance. Segregation is not seen as important. Therefore, the apartment dwellers, they don't hear anything about it. Therefore, they won't use it. So working on a solution for this right now, what is being trying to be brought in is an ongoing program of education, inspection, and feedback. So a loop. Right now it's open loop. There's nothing that can be done. So we try and bring in a closed loop. First of all, education. So all people using the bins must complete online training specific to their individual apartment block. So this is not generic information that maybe not apply exactly to that apartment block. It's generated specifically for the apartment block and tells the apartment dwellers exactly what bins are where and how to use them. Access to the bins is controlled and the bins are inspected on collection. So all bins are individually locked and they're allocated to specific apartments. So when contamination is found, all residents that are using those bins can be locked out of the bins until they redo the training and see what is causing this contamination. Finally, on the feedback, pictures of the contamination can be included in the revised training that apartments must complete before they're given access to the bins. So what has been developed is a smart lock for the bin. This is on trial right now. And I'll just show you a little video of this this is a prototype in operation. So you'll see here the system is activated. This particular key card does not have access to the bin, therefore the bin is locked. the next key card now that is going to be used is one that has access. So each apartment has its own key card, and those key cards are linked to the individual bins, and an individual key card can be given access or denied access to the bins. And finally, then the bin has a tilt switch incorporated into the control mechanism that when it's tipped into the back of the vehicle, it opens automatically. So as I mentioned, we have the tilt switch. The system is operated and accessed by means of a key card. There's an individual key card. Each apartment has its own card. That card is linked to a set of bins, and the bins access can be controlled on a card level, so to the apartment level. So you can have 4 apartments that have access and 1 may be denied access. There are some quick photos of some of the material that we have received so far in the trial. The material is clean because there is intent. That it's only the people who intend to recycle properly will actually take the time to open the bins and place material inside. So right now we have a field trial underway in Cork City, 12 blocks of apartments in total at Student Accommodation Centre. We've started with one block of 16 apartments. The trial is in its 4th month right now. In order to onboard the apartments, which is an important step, how do people actually get access to the system? We sent out an introductory email with a link to self-register. The self-registration allowed the apartments to complete the online training that told them how to recycle and how to recycle properly. And we also followed up with one site visit where I myself did it. I knocked on the doors of the apartments that hadn't registered and encouraged them to do so. And right now we have 88% of the apartments in that block have engaged with the system, which is really an excellent result so far. And because of the success so far with the trial, management of the apartments have decided to expand the scheme out to further blocks. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to David.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Conor. Interesting to see some of the, I suppose, cutting edge developments in this space. I think we're going to run, we're coming up to 10 to the hour, so we're a little bit behind time. And so what we're going to do now is run some surveys in relation to your own experience of recycling in your development. So I'm going to launch the first of those polls or surveys, and this is anonymous. So please indicate your overall experience with recycling in your multi-unit development. So conscious that we have lots of different people from different perspectives in the sector. So we have residents, we have owner occupiers, we have tenants, we have management agents, OMC directors. So I suppose it'd be useful to get insights into your experience. This is anonymous, so we'll run that briefly for another 10 seconds or so. Thank you very much to everyone who has completed it. So about nearly 60% of you have answered that. So I'll give you another couple of seconds to get the maximum output of that. So what's your experience of recycling in your development? Is it in place and working well, in place and not great, tried, previously failed, or never tried? So I'm going to end that now. About 60% of you have answered. I'm going to share the results for the benefit of our panel, and they might start turning on their cameras and their mics now as we open up the panel discussion. I'm going to go back and do the second of our little surveys, which is your brown bin experience, and I'm going to launch that now if I can, and for some reason that's not allowing me to launch. I think I might have to stop the previous one. There we go. And I'm going to launch the other one on brown bins. And if you could answer that as well, again, it's anonymous. So please describe your overall experience with brown bins. So food waste in your multi-unit development. Is it in place and working well? Is it in place but not great? you've tried it previously and failed, or you've never tried. And I think when you see the responses, it'll be shocking but not surprising. I suspect I'll share that in a second with you all. So about 60% of you have answered that. So maybe a few more would answer just to get the maximum output there. So I've run that for about 40 seconds, and I'll end that poll and I'll share the results with you now. So 45% of you have never tried brown bins in your development. So there we go, bearing out a lot of what John and David and Conor McElveny touched on. 13% of you have tried it and failed. 24% in place, but is not great. So presumably there's an amount of contamination, and only about 20% of you feel that it's in place and working well. So I'll stop sharing that now. We're opening up to our panel discussion. We received a number of questions ahead of time by email, and we've had some questions that have come in online as well. We're delighted, of course, to be joined in this panel discussion by Conor Walsh, Secretary of the Irish Waste Management Association, who is key to organising this session today. So with about 10 minutes to go, I suppose the first question, Conor Walsh, was about reducing costs overall in the waste management space. And so I might hand that one over to you, and maybe John might come in on it as well. Thanks, Conor Walsh.
Yeah, thanks, David. Actually, I've been looking at a lot of the questions in the Q&A session, and I decided not to answer them, David, in case you give out to me. But a lot of the questions are similar, and they're relating to Conor McElveny's presentation. So I thought it was really timely. Questions about contaminated bins, about securing access to the bins. And, I think what Conor demonstrated there was really, really good and really important. You need to have a secure bin area. You can't have people coming from outside your complex, dumping mattresses, dumping bulky goods and all of that. And I know that happens. And when you get into a higher tech system with the key cards, with fobs, with whatever way you're going to do it, you can keep that out. And that'll help your costs, certainly. If you can just keep it to your own apartment dwellers, your costs will go down to start with. Things are changing in terms of costs, though, as well, because the government tried to introduce pay by weight a number of years ago, and it didn't get over the line politically. But we are required to charge in an incentivized manner, incentivized charging. So the brown bin and the recycling bin have to be cheaper than the residual waste bin. The system now, we can all weigh the bins. We all have to weigh the bins. Going forward now, we have to weigh every bin, whether it's commercial, household, whatever. So charging by the weight is much more effective. And if apartment dwellers can if you can somehow control the contamination levels and produce better quality recyclables, you will get better prices for that. The waste companies are not stupid. They see when the stuff is just not very recyclable, and they charge more. If they get better quality recyclables, if they get better quality brown bin, they can charge less, and I think everybody can save money in that sense.
Very good.
John Dunn, do you want to come in on that, or will we move
on?
No,
I think Conor's actually stolen my thunder there, so he covered both questions in one go. Fair play to him.
It's the virtuous circle, isn't it? It's starting at source, getting the segregation and the good practices in at source, and moving on from that. The next question then was again about this issue of fly tipping, or private individuals entering the development and disposing, mattresses and furniture. And I think, Conor Walsh, maybe back to you. Is it that security element is the aspect that addresses that?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I got the question that was asked. The police weren't prepared to do anything about it, and I kind of get that. But I think maybe the WURLAs might be helpful in that sense as well. People can't just dump illegally on your property. If you just go and dump in a field, it's illegal. The landowner's in trouble. The person who dumps is in trouble. So you don't want that situation. But yeah, I mean, obviously a locked bin area. Cameras. Look, I've security cameras at my house now. The security cameras are very cheap. So I think that's clearly, it's all about security, isn't it?
John Dunn, I think you wanted to pop in.
Yeah, just to reaffirm that. I mean, the basic question as asked there is how do we stop people coming in from the random people coming in with mattresses and tossing them in the bin storage area? Lock your bin storage area. It's an absolute no-brainer. It's the first thing that has to happen. You can't, none of even Conor McIlvanney's good efforts will work if you haven't got a secure bin area. That's the first priority in that problem.
The next question that we had was specifically in relation to brown bins, and I suppose fine detail on costs. So this was in relation to a small scheme with low food waste output, because a lot of people eat at work. Basically, was the point. And is collection every 2 weeks mandatory, or what's the frequency? And David Barry, I might go over to you on that one.
Thanks, David. Yeah, look, in terms of the collectors, they have an obligation to go and collect the bins every 2 weeks or by fortnightly, and that's stated in the regs and also in their waste collection permits. But in terms of the householder, there's no obligation to put out the bins every 2 weeks if there's only a bag of food waste in the organic bin. But what I would say there is that look at to put out your food waste bin on a regular basis, because if you leave it for 3 or 4 weeks, it will putrefy, it will create smells and odors, and really and truly the quality of the material then that the collector is collecting has lesser value, if you want, for a better sense. So look at the advice is to put it out every 2 weeks, but there's not a necessity to put it out every 2 weeks if there's only a tenth of the bin being used. But just be mindful of the odors, of the nuisance that putrefiable organic waste will create in an apartment block or in a setting like that. Thanks, David.
And over to John Dunn. John.
Yeah, just to say, the circumstances where a brown bin is put out every 2 weeks and there's only one bag in it. I mean, it sounds like only one person in the apartment block, and the question there was from 6 people. Like, the other 5 people are not using the brown bin at all. It's a very unusual circumstances. But as David says, you don't want to leave this stuff for a month either. It'll turn everybody else off looking into the bin as they lift it up and the flies come at them and the smell is there and they just say, oh, I'm not going near that again. There you go.
I think there was a sub question around cost and also around the permit obligations. David Barry, we're going to go over to you on those as well.
Yeah, in terms of the permit obligations, the collector is obliged to collect, as I said, under the Household Food and Bio-Waste Regulations of 2015, to collect it on a fortnightly basis. There is a requirement inside in the waste collection permit, and it speaks to that requirement inside in the waste collection permit to do that collection. In terms of the cost, there is a cost in lifting the brown bin, but as Conor alluded to earlier there, I mean, the cost of lifting a brown bin is less than lifting a general waste bin. So, by diverting the waste into the brown bin or into the organic bin, the recycling bin, you will make savings there in terms of the overall charges for the multi-unit development.
Thanks, David. We're coming up to time now. I'll take one last question from the Q&A that came in, because hopefully a lot of them were answered in the fantastic insights and information provided by David, John, and Conor. And there's a question on designing waste facilities for months. Someone involved in reviewing planning applications, and they consistently feel that the space in the property is inadequate for the size of the bins. Conor Walsh, have you any insights on that, or maybe we'll come back by email later?
John Dunn, are you more comfortable with that one?
Yeah, look, it's very simple. You'll get a lot more waste into a smaller space if there's only one bin. So if you're designing properties, you need to provide for the 3 bins. It's as simple as that.
Very good. Look, it's coming up to 2 minutes to the hour. I would like sincerely to thank David, to thank John, to thank Conor McIlvanney, and to thank Conor Walsh for their work in putting together today's session. As mentioned at the outset, we all have obligations around this, whether we're a resident, an OMC director, property management agent, or in the waste collection industry. We have goals to meet because we have legislative impetus, but we also know that it's the right thing to do ultimately to reduce our carbon impact on the planet. We hope that you found today's session of benefit and that it has provided insights and information to you. We would remind you of our next session, which is with the Corporate Enforcement Authority on the 16th of April. More information will be on our website, housingagency.ie. You can contact us at mud@housingagency.ie from which we will send out the slides and a link to this recording. I'd like again to thank all our contributors today for their time and their efforts in putting this session together. Thanks also to my colleague Vivian, who was with us in the background monitoring the tech and everything else, and to Graham and my colleagues in the communications team on policy and practice in helping to deliver this session to you as well. Hope you found it of benefit. Gur míle maith agaibh agus slán tamam.